growing up in an Asian household just prepared me for a life in Asia. Let me explain. All right, everybody, I'm back in New York City after a lengthy Asia trip, and I know I've been taking multiple trips to Asia this past year, obviously due to the fact that David lives out there, so I got family out there. Also, that's my business partner too. So I just want to tell you 5 realizations I've had from this recent trip to Asia. And on this trip to Asia, I didn't just go to Bangkok, guys. I went to Bangkok, I went to Shanghai, went back to Bangkok, went to Shandong, China, then we went down to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and then we went to Macau, and then back to Bangkok, and then went to the Bay Area, LA, and now I'm back in New York City. So it was quite the trip, and I have some realizations. You want to hear them? Stay tuned, hit that like button, let's go. All right, realization number 1, I could live there. And apparently that shocked a lot of my Asian friends back home when I said that, which is surprising to me, because why? Guys, we're Asian. Of course we could live in Asia. But I think that part of it was that they were like, oh, Andrew, you have so much stuff going on in America. Why would you move there? I'm like, I'm not saying I move there. I'm not saying I will move there, but I'm just saying I could see a life there. And I'm gonna explain to you why life out in Asia is so transferable, movable, such an easy transition, I guess, transitionable. And this goes especially for the people who spend time in kind of Asian dominant areas in America. And obviously, as you know, I have spent time in Asian dominant areas like the San Gabriel Valley, but I also live in New York City right now, and this is not Asian dominant, although it's very, very diverse. And I do go to Flushing sometimes. Long Island City's feeling pretty Chinese right now, but no, I spend most of my life around mixed areas, obviously. But if you have spent any time around Asian dominant areas, then the transition to Asia, especially we're talking about top tier cities here. I'm not saying the rural village, I get it, that life over there is quite different, yes. But in the cities, in the big cities, the big metropolises, life's not that different, especially compared to the Asian enclaves out here. I mean, at this point in time, so many people from these countries have grew up learning English, grew up consuming English content. Maybe they went to international school. Maybe they consider themselves third culture kids. Whatever it is, they seem fluid in both Eastern and Western cultures. They might not be as quite American as like maybe I am, but I'm also not exactly as Asian as they are. But somehow we together can form a bridge and feel like we can fit into those places together, just like they could live in America and I could live in Asia. It's really not that weird. And yes, the people that I do meet overseas, whether I'm in China or Thailand or Vietnam, they are going to be people who probably speak some level of English, because I don't speak the native language that well. And obviously, if we're talking about Vietnam, I don't speak it at all. But what I mean is that these people are not necessarily part of like some elite international class, but they could just be regular people who have learned English over time. Obviously that helps us communicate and everything like that. It's actually kind of funny that when I told certain non-Asian friends that I could see myself living there, they were like, bro, that's the dream, that's what I want to do. But they're like, I'm tied down by all these businesses, and these are non-Asians who technically fit into America better than I do innately, but I don't know, they're the ones dreaming about Asia even more than me. So I think it's just, what I'm saying is that it's not weird for anybody to say that they could probably see a life in Asia. And I'm going to explain why. Point number 2, the culture shock is not as bad as you think. Yes, is there a culture shock going to Asia for almost anybody from the West, especially if you're from the big city? Sure, there is a culture shock. But does this not look like some type of street market in Asia? They're just serving halal food, hot dogs and falafel. But yeah, I mean, there's still street food. The culture shock's not that bad, especially when you're talking about like Bangkok and you're talking about places like Ekamai, Thong Lor. These places are pretty much, to be honest, built for foreigners. Obviously, you're talking about District 1, District 2 in Ho Chi Minh City. Obviously, those places are still very Vietnamese, but they have plenty of Western or foreign stuff. Not necessarily Western only, but they have like a whole little Japantown in District 1. And then District 2 in Vietnam, surprisingly, there's like a whole like brand new mall and suburb, and the mall's gonna look like the mall in Singapore and in Thailand. And I'm not saying everybody in Vietnam speaks English, but you can get by with minimal language, especially in those areas where there is a lot of like English facing or I guess English leaning businesses. And again, if you have met enough Asian people in this life, if you've met international students, you've ever had a friend from another country, it's not that different going over there. It's just almost like there's a whole bunch of your international student friends in that country. It's just a country full of international students. I know that sounds goofy. That's a goofy way to put it, but I'm just trying to put it in perspective for you. So if you know international students, there's a whole bunch of them back over there. At least even went back, or to be honest, that's where they're from. So the culture shock's not that crazy is what I'm saying. And trust me, I am very American. I know you can tell. Another point is that Asian laws are harsh, but they make sense. And what I mean by this is that, man, they do not play around in Asia. They really don't. But if you grew up in a strict household of any sort, a household with any sort of control and any sort of discipline, then it makes sense. It's like living, sometimes in Asia, it just feels like the whole society is governed by Asian parents. Which makes sense, because it actually is. All the lawmakers are, guess what? Asian parents. So when you talk about societies, and like when you talk about Vietnam, where they have literal explicit tiers of theft, where it's like, hey, if you steal over this amount, then you get this many years in prison. If you steal above this amount, then you get this many years. Like, they just have it tiered out. It's just very practical, you know? And I'm not saying that all justice systems are perfect and all lack zero corruption, but I'm just saying that also pretty much makes sense. Also, there's this law in China when I was in Shanghai, that basically if you commit a certain level of crime, not just any crime, I mean, it has to be like, if you did fraud and like theft as an adult, it affects your kids from getting into any sort of elite institution. So meaning that, you know, these elite institutions, they want people who come from like high integrity families, or families who have at least done the right thing or haven't broken any laws. So if your parents broke laws and like frauded people, that's going to affect your essentially credit score. And yes, there is a social credit score in China, but to be honest, I didn't even experience it when I was over there. It's not something that people talk about all the time. It's not something that rules over people's lives, because ultimately, I think most people in China are not even trying to break the law and do anything wrong. That's just the culture there. Yes, it's also a very highly controlled society as far as regulation. They're not controlling necessarily how people think, but they are controlling, obviously, like, you know, they like don't want people to have all the freedoms in the world, because freedom in Asia means something different than freedom in the West. Just remember it this way. Freedom in the West is freedom of the individual to do and say and buy and pretty much be whoever they want, which is beautiful. But also freedom in the East just means freedom from chaos. And the West is kind of chaotic because of all the individual freedoms. So there's just a trade-off, pros and cons, man. Guys, listen, I love the hot dog carts, man. I love the halal carts, but like, how many are you gonna have on the same block? Like, serving the same thing? Like, there's not... I mean, I guess the carts serve multiple things, so you can get multiple items at one cart, but it's like there's 10 of the same cart, and there's almost no differentiation. So anyways, one other point I want to talk about is that Asia has so many cool, well-designed buildings and cafes. Like, if you look here, you got Italy Cafe, and then you got Magnolia Bakery here right next to, you know, Radio City Music Hall, Jimmy Fallon. But honestly, like, the cafes and the design in Asia are so cool, because basically they have a bunch of creatives and smart people in Asia across Vietnam and Thailand, and then labor costs to build stuff is lower, and then the material cost is lower, and then even the cost to operate things is, to be honest, lower, because you don't have to pay the labor and the workers and the employees as much as America. Obviously, you're not paying them what's the equivalent of $15 or $18 USD, which would be insane over there. But basically, you can save on all these costs, and you've learned so much from the West, or design schools and architecture and everything. So basically, they just have a lot of really cool cafes. And I've said this in multiple videos, but the cafes in Asia, I think, beat the cafes in America for sure. And it's not, again, not to say that they're paying the same wages, of course, but I'm just looking at it from face value. They're cooler. And finally, point number 5, the East doesn't need the West as much as it used to. No, I mean, I'm just going to be honest. At a time, the West was such a powerhouse, spreading Western, or you would say European culture and inventions and systems across the world. It was great. It was great. And the Europeans and the white people have benefited a lot from that. That's why white people were, you know, like the top dog for so long, and they still are, but in a global sense. But I'm gonna tell you this, the East doesn't need the West as much as they used to. It learned a lot. It's up now. It came up. And the West was part of it. The West helped. I'm not going to say, you know, I give credit where credit's due, but it's also just like a timeline thing. Can the student ever surpass the master? Yes, it happens all the time. You know, you hire somebody and they work under you for years and you help bring them up, you teach them certain things, but they got this crazy work ethic, great timing, and boom, they totally on some different other timing now. And I'll tell you this, guys, when it comes to even Western culture, I think the East, to be honest, like I think it almost has like as much Western culture as it needs. Like there's kind of this whole sense in America that American culture peaked in the, I would say, early 2000s or late 90s. That's kind of like the sense that people have because now there's all this pop culture and fashion and everything that's just kind of repeating itself. So that's why people say, hey, you know, culture didn't change that much in America. I guess it seemed like, you know, the early 2000s were pretty good. And then since then, it didn't really change in the past 20 years. I'm saying the East doesn't need whatever came in the past, like after 20 years. Like in the past 20 years, like it doesn't need that new culture. Like they learned enough English, they get it. They got coffee shops, they got some of the fashion down, they're influenced by the rest of the world. They came up with their own stuff too, and they also have their own systems to invent their own things and their own technologies. And obviously they had their own like ancient kind of like old school culture with, you know, food and garb and traditions and rituals and everything like that. So basically, that's the feeling I got, is that Asia just doesn't need whatever the West is providing now. Not to say it didn't need what the West had back then, which clearly it was influenced by, but it does not need the West in the same way. And anyways, you guys let me know what you think in the comments down below, you know. And again, I'm not here as a doomer or anything like that. I'm just saying I came back from Asia as an Asian American who thinks a lot about this stuff. And that's what I came up with. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. I'm in the middle of Midtown, 48th and the Avenues of Americas, where there's a bunch of tourists, there's a bunch of halal carts, there's a bunch of street hustlers, there's people, you know, you're gonna hear Empire State of Mind like literally like clockwork every 5 minutes because those buggies or the coolies or whatever, the trolleys, the guys on the bikes, they're blasting the, you know, Empire State of Mind. So New York, concrete jungle where dreams are made up. I'm back in New York City. No, I did not move to Asia. Although, again, I could see a life there. But how come I'm not moving? Huh, maybe I'm working on some stuff here. Stay tuned. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, I'm out. Peace.